My mother only had love in her heart, only wanted the best for me, and nothing that happened to her was ever deserved, and she just wanted to live a normal life.
Kristine Melton was my best friend and my cousin until October 7th, 2019. It is my task to describe this beautiful human and to somehow capture Kristine in a way that 12 strangers and 2 alternates can understand, using only my words. And I will do so sitting no more than 20 feet from the convicted, who beat Kristine, murdered Kristine, and threw her away like garbage.
A Florida man convicted in the murders of 2 women now faces the ultimate punishment.
We, the jury, find by a vote of 9-3 that Wade Wilson should be sentenced to death. We, the jury, find by a vote of 10-2 that Wade Wilson should be sentenced to death.
Wade Stephen Wilson was convicted earlier this month for the horrific deaths of Kristine Melton and Diane Ruiz, who were killed within days of one another. As the state claimed in the trial, he murdered the 2 women for the sake of killing. In October of 2019, Wilson went on a crime spree that led to their untimely deaths. Investigators believe Kristine Melton was choked to death by Wilson after they met at a bar in Fort Myers, Florida. Prosecutors say on October 7th of 2019, Wilson stole Melton's car after killing her. And Wilson's alleged crime spree would only escalate. After murdering Melton and stealing her car, he went to visit his former girlfriend, Melissa Montanez, and used Melton's phone to contact her. After Montanez and Wilson met up, he attacked her.
He arrives at Miss Montez's business called Mia's Spa in that black Nissan Versa. When he arrives, he makes contact with Miss Montanez. It's not nice. He's trying to pull Miss Montanez into the car. Miss Montanez tries to fight him off. He gets out. A car rolls back. It's another car. Physical altercation takes place between him and Miss Montanez. Miss Montanez isn't anything but 5'2", weighs barely 100+ pounds, soaking wet. She's trying everything she can to fend him off. Comes a point in time when he punches her in the face. Blood flies everywhere. There's also a point in time when he holds her up against the wall. His hand, so she can't move.
Then fled again in Melton's car, and that's when he encountered Diane Ruiz. Ruiz was walking home from work, and the now convicted killer asked for directions, and she never made it home. When she got into the car, Wilson strangled her before running her over with Melton's car repeatedly.
What we know is that Miss Ruiz had been strangled, and what we also know is that she died as a result of blunt force trauma because of the multiple rib fractures. And if you want to believe what Mr. Wilson told law enforcement, was that he had driven over her repeatedly and tried to make her look like spaghetti. You'll learn from the medical examiner's office testimony that when one drives over a body repeatedly, rib fractures are likely to occur. Multiple rib fractures are likely to occur. Now, Ms. Ruiz's body wasn't found until a couple days later. But what we know is that when she was missing, there was a frantic search for her that was being conducted. Okay? And after that search was being conducted, Ms. Melton, her search was being conducted right around the same time. Mr. Wilson leaves Ms. Ruiz on that empty lot, underneath those shrubs, underneath that tree. Gets back in that Nissan Versa, he leaves, he goes back across the bridge, and he goes to a place called Joe's Crab Shack, which conveniently enough is just right across the street from Mia's Spa. Law enforcement gets there. And the reason why it goes to Joe's Crab Shack is because he and Melissa Martinez were communicating. She was trying to get him to a particular location so that way law enforcement could make an arrest. So when he arrives at Joe's Crab Shack, you're also going to learn that law enforcement gets in contact with him there. He plays dumb. He has absolutely no idea as to why he's being asked about any type of battery. He doesn't know why about anything. But what he does do is he does manage to get away from the officer who had tried to go ahead and block him in. He wasn't snaking around. So he gets back into stays in his car, and then he backs out and leaves Joe's Crab Shack's parking lot. And you all know where he headed there. He heads to Mateo's Graphics. He needs to get out of town.
Then after fleeing, prosecutors say Wilson broke into a nearby home.
So now we're back to where we began. At Mateo's Graphics, when he leaves, before law enforcement gets there to search that building, he proceeds to go off into a neighborhood behind Mateo's Graphics. He goes to a place northeast 1st Avenue, which is actually the residence of a young couple by the name of Fanny Amlin. And the Amlins, conveniently enough, had just left their house the day before to go to Ohio. It was empty. He'd broken in through the back, helped himself to some food, helped himself to some clothes, helped himself to some drink. While he was there, he needed help. He calls his dad. I need to get out of town. I need your help. Send me an Uber. While that was happening, law enforcement is conducting an investigation. They knew who he was. They were researching, trying to figure out who his next point of contact would be. They'd already reached out to his dad. They needed to know where his whereabouts are. Dad tells them, he's conflicted. It's his son, right? But when he starts describing what he had done, he describes it in such a way where he's bragging. He wants his dad to feel that excitement. It made his dad sick. His dad gets the address, tells him, I'm going to send you an Uber, passes that information along to the marshals. Marshals descend on that particular location. Mr. Kent Amlin and Miss Fanny Amlin are contacted and asked, hey, is this guy supposed to be in your residence? They're like, absolutely not. You give us permission to go in? Absolutely. His dad is encouraging Mr. Wilson to come outside. He finally does, subsequently arrested.
The first witness called by the state would be an acquaintance of Wilson's, a man named Joshua Luckage, who Wilson came to for help after the murders.
Now, I'd like to direct your attention specifically to the 7th of October of 2019. What were you doing that day?
It was a normal business day. I was just dealing with clients that morning.
And so were you at your business at that time?
Yes.
Would that be at 2309 Hancock Bridge Parkway?
Yes.
Did there come an occasion when you came into contact with Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Would you please describe for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how that came about?
Wade came in a black car. He backed up to one of the buildings on the property there, and he came up to my truck, my vehicle, when I was on the property, and I was with a client at that time, so I told him to give me a moment, and I'll be right with him. And once I went into the building, he was there trying to get a plane ticket or a bus ticket or whatever he could from me to leave town.
Now, when you saw Mr. Wilson, could you please describe for us what he was wearing at that time?
He was wearing sweatpants only, no shoes, no shirt. He was bloody, and he was missing a couple of teeth.
Could you please describe for ladies and gentlemen jury what his demeanor was?
His demeanor was frantic, in a rush to leave as quickly as he could, because he had just done something horrific and killed people.
When he was speaking to you and asking you for your assistance, did that give you any cause for concern?
Not right away, and once I took a look at him again, I started to believe what he was saying.
And what exactly was he saying to you?
He said he killed people, and he rolled up someone in a carpet or bedding or whatever it was, and that he also needed to get out of town. He needed a plane ticket and a bus ticket or anything he could.
So was he frantically asking you for assistance?
Yes.
Kristine Melton's best friend, Stephanie Johnson, would later be called to testify as she detailed in front of the Fort Myers jury how Kristine met Wilson that night at the bar.
Do you have any specific reason the two of you chose the Buddha on that night?
There was live music there that night, so we wanted to go see a band play.
When you got there, what was just sort of the general environment of the bar?
It wasn't overly crowded. There was, a decent amount of people there that night, dancing, drinking, nothing out of the ordinary from a typical bar.
Was there a band playing?
Yes.
Now, were you friendly and did you talk to other people that were there?
Yeah, we socialized quite a bit. There's a couple of different bars in the main bar, and we were down at one bar, we danced, we got drinks at other bars, we talked to the people that were there. Pretty standard going out night.
Now, obviously you're drinking and listening to music this entire time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had been drinking pretty heavily that night.
And is that why you chose to get an Uber?
Yes, yeah, we both knew we were going to be drinking, so we didn't want to be driving at all.
Now, while you were there, did someone approach you?
Yeah, towards the end of the night, as we were walking up to the upstairs bar, somebody jumped out in front of me, kind of just like to get my attention, and said, "Hey, who's your friend?" and gestured towards Kristine. He seemed friendly and introduced himself, and I grabbed Kristine and said, "Hey, this guy wants to meet you."
What was his demeanor?
Friendly, charming.
Is there any red flags that popped up when you were talking to him?
No.
How did he introduce himself to you?
At that point, he introduced himself as JR.
Do you see JR sitting in the courtroom today?
Yes.
Would you please point to him and identify an article of clothing that he's wearing?
Right there, in a bright blue suit.
Let the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant.
Okay.
Now, has his appearance changed since the time that you met him?
Yes, he has a lot more tattoos on his face. He did not have any facial tattoos
May I
the night
approach
we
a
met
witness?
him.
What happened when you got back to Kristine's home?
When we got back to Kristine's home, the three of us went into her house, and I know Kristine and I had this sense of relief that we had made it home, you know, that we got home, you know, safely, and, you know, just it was winding down. I remember sitting on the couch and taking my shoes off. I remember Kristine standing in the kitchen getting something to drink. And I remember telling her, you know, I had to go home because I had to go to work the next day and take my son to school.
Now, where was your son staying that night?
He was with my mom.
And did you and your son live with your mom?
Yeah, we lived with her at the time.
Now, about what time did you leave to go home so that you could take your son to school and go to work?
About 6 o'clock.
Now, prior to leaving, did everything seem fine?
Yeah, it did. And I remember telling Kristine, you know, I have to go home, I have to go to work. And she was like, okay. She hugged me and kissed me goodbye and said, I'll talk to you tomorrow.
And again, when she told you goodbye and that she'd see you tomorrow, did you have any concerns for her safety?
No.
And in fact, if you did, would you have left her home with just her and Wade Wilson in that house?
Not at all. And if she was concerned, Kristine would have never let me leave that house if she was scared. She would have said, let's get this guy out of here together.
So when you left, is it safe to say that really the night was over, the party was over?
Yeah.
It's already morning time.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, like I said, we had this sense of relief that we had made it home. You know, we obviously were in a car with somebody who couldn't drive a car, and I know for me that was the scariest part of that night, was the being behind the wheel of a car with somebody who couldn't drive. And I know when we got back to Kristine's house in that Uber, it felt like, you know, we were home safe.
And it seems that your concern was not driving while intoxicated because along the way you had gotten Ubers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, when you left, you said that you had to take your son to school, and you also had to go to work. Mm-hmm. What time did you go to work?
I had to work the morning shift at Duffy's that day. I think I was at work by 10:30 in the morning. My son starts school at 9, so I dropped him off and then went to work.
Now, you mentioned earlier that Kristine worked at Duffy's. Did she have to work a shift that day?
She was not scheduled to work that day.
Nevertheless, did you reach out to her just to check in with her at some point?
Yeah, I had texted her in the early afternoon and just said, "You up?" And I did not receive a response.
A medical examiner would later testify about the gruesome injuries Kristine Melton faced in her final moments.
And what, if anything, did you note were of any concern to you?
Sure. I mean, well, certainly, just looking externally, you can see that she had a large number of bruises on her body, on her face, you know, a swollen eye, contusions around the eye, contusions around the mouth. She had bruising all over her torso, all over her arms. So it was suggested that she had blunt trauma. And being a young person, you know, you always wonder if whether or not that could be, you know, the cause of a person's death. And so similar to the injuries we describe here, when Noelle did the internal examination, you can see that there was a significant amount of hemorrhaging on both sides of the neck, within both, skeletal muscles of the neck. She also had bruising in her scalp, all over her scalp, as well as within the subscalp muscles. So again, showing significant blunt force trauma. Also, if I can continue, what was notable about this case was when she did the internal examination, she also saw that there was contusions of her internal organs as well. So forces that were directed to the outside of the body also went inward. And so she had bruising or contusions of the lungs. She had a contusion of the liver. She also had contusions on the back of her bladder, as well as contusions to her colon, indicating that there was a significant force to the abdomen as well.
Now, as a result of having observed the external as well as the internal examination of Ms. Melton, did you also conduct an examination of her brain?
I did, yes.
And what did that examination reveal to you?
Sure. I mean, it was a structurally normal brain, so there wasn't anything congenitally wrong, any brain masses or anything that would cause a person to die. But the interesting thing that I did see was the brain was swollen or edematous, and that to me fits with the injuries you observe on her scalp and around her head. It suggests that there was an underlying concussive trauma, because a brain can swell if a person is deprived of oxygen, but it needs time to have that process to occur. So if a person, let's say, you cut off oxygen or blood flow to a person's brain, and then you let them recover, that brain will swell. But if a person dies from injuries, and in this case, more than likely, she was asphyxiated from strangulation, she would have died, not allowing the brain to swell because of that process. And so it suggests to me that that swelling occurred prior to that, probably from concussive trauma to her head.
And did you ultimately concur with the doctor as it relates to her findings that Ms. Melton died as a result of asphyxiation?
Yes.
He would also testify about the horrific injuries done to Diane Ruiz's body as well, including multiple fractures, broken bones, and severe bruising.
What injuries did you note, if any, on the external examination of Ms. Diane Ruiz?
Sure. Most notably, so she was in the stages of putrefactive decomposition. So her tissues were being decomposed and degrading. She had some evidence of animal or scavenging activity on her body as well. And so portions of her ears and nose were removed already, most likely by avian scavengers. But I could see externally, first and foremost, that she had fracturing of the nasal bone. She also had a laceration underneath her left breast. She also had bruising or hemorrhaging in the skin on both sides of the left and right sides of the body.
Was that the extent of the external injuries that you observed? On
the most significant external. There was, of course, a lot of significant internal injuries.
And did you document all of these
Well,
by way of
I apologize. She also had, what I didn't talk about was bruising on the back of her left forearm, bruising on the back of her left hand. I can also see that she had a fracture of the fourth finger, the proximal part of the fourth finger, and she also had some bruising on her right arm as well.
What kind of force would cause multiple fractures such as those?
A significant compressive type force, because if you can imagine, the body's laying on the ground and my hands are the ribs, because of the top of the ribs and the bottom ribs. You have fractures in the top, lateral aspects, and the bottom. So it's more or less a compressive force that caused all those fractures together. So a significant weight bearing down, or a force bearing down upon the body.
So would you say that, I don't know, an automobile driving over a body could cause that kind of?
That would certainly cause that, yeah.
While Wilson would deny he committed the murders, his father testified Wilson gave him a full confession.
Did he end up calling you later that evening?
Yes, ma'am.
And what did he tell you in that call that evening?
The final call?
Nope, the call before the final call.
He just told me, he did something. There was 2 people gone that would not be back. He said, I'm a killer. I just told him to call me back. I just thought it was another story,
So at this point, when he says that there were 2 people that wouldn't be with us and that he was a killer, did you put a lot of weight into that?
No, ma'am.
Did you think he was just telling you a story?
He's a good storyteller.
So did he then call you back a third time?
Yes, ma'am.
What time did he call you back?
It was around 10 o'clock.
I want to go back to that dinner time call. When he talked about these 2 people who were no longer with us and that he was a killer, did he show any type of remorse?
No, ma'am.
So let's go now to the 10 o'clock call. Again, your wife knew about kind of what was going on during that day.
Yes, ma'am.
And when he called back at 10, did he go into more details about what he had told you earlier?
Yes, ma'am.
So let's start with the first girl. If you could tell the jurors, what did he tell you?
He just said he met a girl at a bar. They went back to her house, hung out for a little bit, and then she fell asleep.
What did he say happened after she fell asleep?
He said he got on top of her and choked her.
What name did he call her? Did he refer to her in a derogatory term?
He said, I choked that.
Okay. And what did he say he did after he choked her?
He said he stayed in the house for a little while, and then he rolled her up and was going to try to put her in her trunk, but he couldn't lift her.
Did he say why he was unable to put her in her trunk?
He said that he felt like rigor mortis had started to set in.
And does rigor mortis make your body stiff? You didn't know?
I think so.
So he just told you that that was the reason that he couldn't lift her and get her into her trunk?
Yes, ma'am.
And when he said her trunk, it was the trunk of her car he was going to put her in?
Yes, ma'am.
So what did he tell you he did when he couldn't get her body into her own trunk?
He left her there and took her car.
What did he say about the second girl?
He said he saw her walking down the street and stopped and asked her for directions. And she got in the car with him.
What did he say happened once she got in the car with him?
He said he reached over and choked her.
And did he tell you that he choked her while he was driving?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, what did he say happened after he choked her?
He said he was looking for a place to put her body.
Did he find a place where he eventually dumped her body?
Yes, ma'am.
What did he tell you about the situation when he got to the place where he was going to dump her body?
He said that he pulled her out of the car and realized that she was still breathing.
So what did he tell you he did when he realized she's still breathing?
He said he got back in the car and ran her over until she looked like spaghetti.
As he's telling you all these things, what's his demeanor as he's telling you?
He was excited.
When you say excited, what do you mean by that?
I felt like he was wanting me to feel the way he felt about it.
Did he seem proud of it?
Yes.
Did he seem to show any kind of remorse?
No, ma'am.
And was he able to go into great detail about both of these ladies' deaths?
Yes, ma'am.
The second girl that he killed and left in this lot, did he think that she would be found?
No, ma'am.
He seemed to think he did a good job hiding her body.
Yes, ma'am.
During closing arguments, the prosecution painted Wilson as a monster who killed for the sake of killing.
This case was about killing for the sake of killing. He told detectives, I've already done it once. I'll do it again. But it's not about that he killed. It's about how he killed. Blunt force trauma gained compliance for submission. Strangulation for silence. According to him, it only takes 2 minutes. He doesn't get scratched. He doesn't get hurt. They don't yell. They're quiet. They can't get away even if they wanted to. He's too strong. Those are the people he goes after. On the 7th of October of 2019, he went after Kristine Melton, he went after Melissa Montanez, and he went after Diane Ruiz. Only one survived that day. Only one. Why? Because there was too many people around. But if you remember what he said, he'd killed her too if given a chance.
But during the defense closing argument, Wilson's attorney admitted Wilson did the brutal slayings because he was out of his mind.
Look at the timeline. Miss Melton was murdered sometime between 2 and 4, maybe, when Miss Slobodian left. She had to go to work. Then there's the incident about 7:30, 8 o'clock with Miss Montanez. According to her fiance, Miss Ruiz, was going to work between 9 and sometime between 9 and 11. She left the house. So the contact between Mr. Wilson and Miss Ruiz is on a road in broad daylight. This isn't some kidnapping in the middle of the night. This is in broad daylight. Again, it's almost a carbon copy of Miss Melton. Again, running over the body 10 to 20 times. Nobody's saying that's not depraved. We're not arguing he didn't do it. There's solid evidence that he is responsible for those 2 deaths and the battery of Miss Montanez. But Miss Montanez's testimony, you need to think about that, whether this was premeditated in term. I mean, Miss Melton had sex with him. He could have just gotten up and left or stayed with her. Instead, he murders her. That's not clear thinking, shall we say. I'm not arguing insanity. I'm just arguing that the state's claiming premeditation, and I'm saying he's whacked out. He's just out of his mind for any of this.
And it would take about 2 hours for the Fort Myers jury to come back with their decision.
Count 1, first-degree murder, Kristine Melton. The defendant is guilty of first-degree murder. Count 2, grand theft motor vehicle. The defendant is guilty of grand theft motor vehicle. Count 3, battery. The defendant is guilty of battery. Count 4, first-degree murder, Diane Ruiz. The defendant is guilty of first-degree murder. Count 5, burglary of dwelling. The defendant is guilty of burglary of a dwelling. Count 6, first-degree petty theft. The defendant is guilty of first-degree petty theft. Dated 6/12/24, so say we all, 4-person.
And that wouldn't be the end for the trial of Wade Wilson. Because he was facing the death penalty, the trial would move to the punishment phase.
In this phase, we're going to focus on what makes this first-degree murder aggravated. Now, as the court instructed you, before there is a sentence of death, you must unanimously agree that at least one aggravator, just one, has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. We are submitting to you 4 aggravators. 4 aggravators for one of the first-degree murders and 4 aggravators for the second first-degree murder. Ladies and gentlemen, 3 of which, on each, you've already decided. It was inherent in your verdict. 3 of which have already been proven. 1 you're going to hear about shortly here today. The first 2 I want to talk to you a little bit about. One is called cold, calculated, and premeditated. The second one is referred to as heinous, atrocious, and cruel. Now, these might be aggravators that you may have heard about over the course of your life, but I want to go through them with you. The first one is called cold, calculated, and premeditated. Now, what this factor forces you to do is it forces you to essentially consider what his plans were and what his intent was at the time of the killing. Okay? The aggravator forces you to consider what he went through for the killing. Okay? And the evidence that we've presented to you during the course of the trial already proves this factor.
Now, you're going to hear some mitigating circumstances, and we've already talked about this. We talked about it in jury selection. The reason they're called circumstances and not factors is because they don't have to be proven beyond every reasonable doubt. They only have to be proven to you by a greater weight of the evidence. A little bit more than not, as we talked about in jury selection. Among the mitigating circumstances, Mr. Gardner even alluded to it. You can take all kinds of things in Mr. Wilson's life and treat them as mitigating circumstance. The few things that you've heard about him from the record seem horrendous. But if you go back and you recall the testimony of witnesses, and this evidence has already been shown to you, when the witnesses were questioned about what Mr. Wilson was like when he's not on drugs, he's charming, he's polite, he's cool. I didn't know they still use that phrase. He's in a good mood, he's friendly, he's outgoing. These are all mitigating circumstances that you can take into consideration when you're weighing them against aggravating factors. You'll do what you need to, have discussions amongst yourself. You'll figure out what facts are really facts and which recitation in closing argument is a variation of the facts. We believe that you will come back. You will return the only recommendation that you can once you finish that weighing process, and that would be the recommendation of life in prison where Mr. Wilson will die. Thank you.
And since the case is in the penalty phase, it was up to the defense to present mitigating circumstances that support a sentence to save their client's life. So they called two witnesses, a clinical psychologist and forensic psychiatrist, to the stand. Dr. Hyman Eisenstein testified Wilson's mental health and behavior began to change at a young age.
As a result of your conversations with these individuals, did you obtain any background information as to Wade Wilson's progression through life?
Yes.
And what information did you obtain that you felt was useful in reaching your ultimate diagnoses?
Mr. Wilson was adopted by Steve and Candy Wilson almost after birth. Both the older sisters, Wendy and Whitney, are the biological daughters of Steve and Candy Wilson. And through a church gathering, they found out that Mr. Wilson's mother, biological mother, was 14 years old, had mental illness, had medical issues, and was unable to care for Wade Wilson. Shortly thereafter, they adopted him and became part of the family, the unit of the two older sisters and Mr. Wade Wilson, the youngest.
In Mr. Wilson's younger years, were there any, did they express any concerns about his mental health, or was he average?
So throughout his younger years, up through puberty, he was functioning fine. He was active in sports. He was part of the family.
He went to church?
He went to church on a regular basis. And for the most...
How was he as a student?
He was a good student.
All right. What happened after puberty?
So they found that there was a dramatic change that occurred in puberty. His mental health changed. His behavior changed. He became reclusive, paranoid, mood swings, very aberrant behavior. He would sometimes think that there are people aliens out to get him. Very concerned about the family, the parents, and he became very disruptive and very, very difficult to manage.
Did he start experimenting with controlled substances?
Yes.
What type of help did the family try and get for Wade Wilson when they first started noticing these behaviors?
So they tried to get mental health treatment. They sought out psychologists. Mr. Wilson was not cooperative and very difficult in terms of trying to get him the help that they sought. And unfortunately, it was only through the police, when his behavior became destructive, that intervention finally occurred.
There's a terminology in our system called the Baker Act, where people are involuntarily placed in a mental health facility. Was that process utilized for Mr. Wade Wilson?
Yes.
And how old he was when that occurred?
I think he was about 15 or 16, and he was Baker acted.
Did that term of involuntary placement, did that result in any corrective action of his behaviors?
No.
Do you recall reviewing anything else in order to assist you with your ultimate determination and diagnoses?
I did review a letter from Dr. Wilson.
The second defense expert, Dr. Mark Mills, testified Wilson suffered from some kind of psychotic disorder based on Dr. Eisenstein's interview. However, Mills' testing of Wilson delivered invalid results because Wilson exaggerated his symptoms.
Did you have an opportunity to have him perform any testing like Dr. Eisenstein had described?
Yeah, I mean, as a psychiatrist, I don't do a lot of testing, but I was tutored in the administration of various so-called personality tests. I say so-called because although they're called personality tests, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory and the Personality Assessment Inventory, they're really tests of major mental illness, tests of psychopathology. And I asked Ms. Perez to administer one, to watch him, basically just giving him the piece of paper, say, read the instructions and answer the questions. And she had done that, and I got that score, that test back and scored it. And then I asked him, which he did, to do the personality assessment inventory. So we had two psychological tests which were administered in the presence of either Ms. Perez or myself, and which were subsequently scored.
And what did his scores indicate to you?
His scores indicated that he was non-compliant, that he either, I mean, he answered the questions, that's kind of partial compliance, but that he invalidated each test by exaggerating symptoms that most people do not have, or most people do not have to that same degree. So, in effect, he said, wow, I've got every symptom in the book. And of course, every symptom in the book is many too many symptoms. Even people who were seriously ill only have some symptoms.
So, did you make any diagnosis or determinations based upon the information that you had?
Yeah, my diagnosis and belief is that Mr. Wilson has some kind of psychotic disorder. Sadly, because he was not particularly forthcoming with me, I can't characterize it very well. Generally, when I testify, I have more information both from the evaluee, both from the defendant in a case like this, and I have more information from prior hospital records, from Baker Act hospitalizations, from other psychiatric hospitalizations, and I can characterize that disorder pretty well. Here we've heard about mood swings that could suggest bipolar disorder. We heard about a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder in the JO records. There's a good study going back to really my time in medical school called The Stages of Mania, which says 1972 is the date of the study. You can't distinguish acutely between schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and schizoaffective disorder. So I don't know exactly what Mr. Wilson has, but I think it is very significant.
How about the tattoos on his face?
Well, I mean, they're disturbing and they're disfiguring, I think, but I'm an old guy. I mean, there are some people who like skin decoration, but I would say most people would be off-put by those tattoos.
All right. Did you see a picture, booking photo of Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Okay. And he didn't have any of those tattoos on his face?
None.
But when it came time for the state's expert witness to take the stand, Dr. Michael Herkoff testified Wilson didn't suffer from a psychotic disorder.
Does Mr. Wilson have a long history of substance abuse? He does. Now, when we're talking about substance use, you'd also come up with a slide reflecting your concerns as it relates to Mr. Wilson's seeking of substance, using of substance. Is that right?
Correct.
And why is it of concern to you as it relates to Mr. Wilson's mental health?
Well, because she knows that she first started noticing changes in his behavior around 13. That's in her note. Mr. Wilson, in my interview, told me he was a drug addict since he was 13. As I told you before, parents are oftentimes the last one to know that the kid is using. And so while the mother, I believe that she noticed these behavior changes, and then when he gets into school, he starts getting into trouble. What's he get in trouble for? Selling drugs. I think if you wanted to look at the more logical explanation, is, in my professional opinion, is it more likely that this is an emerging schizophrenia or an emerging bipolar disorder, or is this the effects of the drug use? In my professional opinion, you're seeing the effects of the drug use. And the drugs that he used, I mean, talks about cocaine, mushrooms, acid, meth, at various points in his life. So that all of these drugs can affect cognitive functioning, mental status, hallucinations, delusions.
Loved ones of Kristine Melton and Diane Ruiz would take the stand to testify about Wilson's impact on the loss of their loved ones. Kristine Melton's cousin described her as a beautiful person who was treated like garbage in her final moments.
Kristine Melton was my best friend and my cousin until October 7th, 2019. It is my task to describe this beautiful human and to somehow capture Kristine in a way that 12 strangers and 2 alternates can understand, using only my words. And I will do so sitting no more than 20 feet from the convicted, who beat Kristine, murdered Kristine, and threw her away like garbage. I hope you will understand this is not the ideal scenario to be sharing personal stories, although you would have loved them. There are no words to describe the absolutely lovely Kristine Ann Melton, but I will try. She was precious, not just to me, to everyone who knew her. She was a daughter, a sister, an aunt, a niece, and a cousin. She was loved, and her life had value. Kristine was remarkably funny, had a quick wit, and an entirely unique personality. If you were with her, you laughed. We laughed every single day. When you were with her, you felt safe and understood, never judged. She was a relief to your soul just to sit next to her. She had a way about her. Children loved her because Kristine was good and they could feel it. She wasn't an aunt. She was the aunt. Kristine was the godmother of my son, and it was her greatest honor and one that she deserved. Our children miss her in ways I could never articulate, and it is gut-wrenching to see them so destroyed. They were robbed of her. Kristine will never experience motherhood, a role she was born to play. Kristine was strong, brave, independent, and loyal. She was the friend you wished you had. She was the friend who got more fired up about your problems than you did. She was fiercely protective and always on your side, even if you were wrong. Kristine loved traveling and exploring the world. She would buy plane tickets and figure out the rest later. She loved camping and concerts and Halloween and a themed party of any kind and celebrating life and accomplishments. Kristine adored her mother and loved being with her. They were two peas in a pod. They were the same and different in all the most beautiful ways. They lived less than 1 block apart in 2019 when this occurred. Every relationship or friendship she had was special because she was part of it. She was a cheerleader to us all. She loved us unconditionally, completely, and with her entire being until October 7th, 2019. Kristine's mother has not been at this trial. Once Kristine was murdered, she was never the same. How could she be?
Then Diane Ruiz's youngest son would give a heartbreaking testimony about how his mother wasn't there for his accomplishments because of Wilson.
I was forced to move states to better accommodate for what I needed for my education. I moved far away from Florida because I grew up everywhere with my mom just to have her be stripped away on a random weekday. I tried my best to avoid going back. She was really excited for my future because she knew I was going to achieve big things, and I refused to disappoint her, even in death, because it helps me push on every day. I would like to share some achievements I've been able to accomplish. I did 3 years of marching band. We achieved superiors in the Blue Ribbon all throughout high school. My senior year, I achieved my high school's most principal award. Sophomore year, I won my first scholarship based off of my art portfolio. I graduated high school. I got accepted into all the colleges I applied and also received a full ride scholarship from one. My senior year, I received the John Phillips User Award for marching band. I got my driver's license. I received my first car. During COVID, I ran a whole jewelry business for 2 years at 16. I got my first job. I'm getting my first apartment July. I'm a year ahead in my college education, and I have my first internship as a graphic designer. I only listed 13 out of many, both big and small, achievements. All 13 of these achievements my mom didn't get the chance to see me accomplish. My mother will never get the chance to see me get married, get to see me graduate college as a first-generation graduate, get to see me get my first real job. During college, I was sent to the ER for the first time. I got into my first car accident, and the only person I wanted to call was my mom, or how she went missing. I trusted my gut so much. Everything told me that she was coming home, and I haven't been able to trust her again. Or how when I was told she was missing while walking home from my bus stop, or how everybody in my town knew that she was dead before me, or how on my 15th birthday I almost killed myself because I couldn't bear the idea without turning 15 without my mom. I lived 5 years without her, and not a single day has gone by where I haven't been able to not think about her. My mother only had love in her heart, only wanted the best for me, and nothing that happened to her was ever deserved, and she just wanted to live a normal life.
As the prosecution gave their final argument to the jurors before they weighed the decision of life or death, the state urged the jurors to consider the atrocity of the crimes.
Asking you to weigh the large number of bruises to her body. We're asking you to weigh her swollen eye. We're asking you to weigh the cuts around her mouth and her eye. We're asking you to weigh the bruising all over her torso, the bruising all over her arms. We're asking you to weigh the blunt force trauma. We're asking you to weigh the significant hemorrhaging on both sides of her neck. We're asking you to weigh the bruising of her lungs, the bruising of her liver, the bruising of the back of her bladder, the bruising to her colon, the significant force to her abdomen. We're asking you to weigh the injuries around her scalp and around her head. We're asking you to weigh the swelling of her brain. We're asking you to weigh his hands around her neck, not being able to breathe, taking that last breath, knowing it would be her last. We're asking you to weigh the cold, calculated, and premeditated way in which he murdered Kristine Melton. To weigh how he picked her out from all the ladies at the bar that night, how he flirted and got her to her house, waiting until no one was around, waiting until she was asleep, his hands around her neck, not being able to breathe. We're asking you to weigh the heinous and atrocious and cruel way in which she killed Diane Ruiz. Diane Ruiz, who was simply walking to work. How we met her and how he left her. We're asking you to weigh her fractured nasal bone, the laceration under her left breast. We're asking you to weigh the hemorrhaging and the skin on the left and right sides of her body. We're asking you to weigh the bruising on her left forearm and the back of her left hand, the bruising on her right arm and the fracture of her finger. We're asking you to weigh the hemorrhaging to her neck, her broken hyoid bone, her fractured thyroid, her fractured ribs, fighting her until she was dead. We're asking you to weigh him running her over with a car. We're asking you to weigh the cold, calculated, and premeditated way in which he murdered Diane Ruiz, picking her up while she's walking down the street, sensing fear, not letting her go, getting her into his car, secluding her.
Meanwhile, the defense in their final argument reiterated Wilson's drug use had an adverse effect on him.
In his statement, it must have been like bath salts or flakka. It just made me lose my effing mind, and it made me effing get crazy. When I'm sober, I'm actually a decent guy, which is what everybody else said. Whatever that dude had me on, like fentanyl, flakka, whatever the F it was, dude, it was not cocaine. I thought it was different, and he gave me a lot of it. That had me up for 2.5 days. Once again, that's not an excuse for doing what he did. I just want you to understand what his state of mind was when he was going through these events on October 7th. And that person is not Wade Wilson. And that person does not deserve your recommendation for death. Now, drugs. Well, you know, just because you're a drug addict, we're not going to not consider the death penalty just because you're a drug addict. It's not that he's a drug addict. He took drugs. He started taking drugs at 13. What drugs he's taken over his lifetime, we're not sure. What's the frequency that he's taken the drugs over his lifetime? We're not sure of that either. All we're sure of is that night he was given drugs. What drugs, we don't know. But one of the gems from Dr. Herkov yesterday, as an example, if you have a disorder and you feed that disorder, just say cocaine, what does that do? That amplifies the problem. Well, what if it's another drug? What if it's one of these synthetic drugs that Wade Wilson complained of? What does that do to Wade Wilson when he has a mental health issue? Well, he took it himself. I know he took it himself. You're not rewarding him. You're just trying to decide if you want to take that guy who's cool, who's polite, who's charming, who's friendly, who, in his own words, up one night and does that.
It would only take the jury about 90 minutes to come to their decision, as Wilson stayed stoic as the verdict was read out loud. And because of a new Florida law, jurors don't have to come to a unanimous decision to vote for death. It only takes 8 out of 12 jurors for the recommendation.
We, the jury, finds as follows as to the defendant, Wade Wilson, in this case. As to count 1, first-degree murder, Kristine Melton. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt that Wade Wilson was previously convicted of a felony and under sentence of imprisonment or placed on community control or on felony probation. Yes. We, the jury, find unanimously that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt that Wade Wilson was previously convicted of another capital felony or of a felony involving the use of threat of violence to the person. Yes. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt that the first-degree murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. Yes. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt that the first-degree murder was committed in a cold, calculated, and premeditated manner without any pretense of moral or legal justification. We, the jury, unanimously found the state proved 1 or more aggravating factors. Each of us has considered whether 1 or more mitigating circumstances exist. Each of us has weighed whether the proven aggravating factors are sufficient and whether the proven aggravating factors outweigh any proven mitigating circumstances. We have further considered whether Wade Wilson should be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole or death. We, the jury, find by a vote of 9-3 that Wade Wilson should be sentenced to death.
But in the charges from Diane Ruiz's murder, the jurors found themselves with 1 more on their side to sentence Wilson to death.
As to count 4, first-degree murder, Diane Ruiz. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt the existence of aggravating factors. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt that Wade Wilson was previously convicted of a felony and under sentence of imprisonment or placed on community control or on felony probation. Yes. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt that Wade Wilson was previously convicted of another capital felony or of a felony involving the use of threat of violence to the person. Yes. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt that the first-degree murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. Yes. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt that the first-degree murder was committed in a cold, calculated, and premeditated manner without any pretense of moral or legal justification. Yes. If fewer than 8 jurors vote for the death penalty, your recommendation must be for a penalty of life in prison without the possibility of parole. If 8 or more jurors vote for the death penalty, your recommendation must be for the death penalty. We, the jury, unanimously found the state proved 1 or more aggravating factors. Each of us has considered whether 1 or more mitigating circumstances exist. Each of us has weighed whether the proven aggravating factors are sufficient and whether the proven aggravating factors outweigh any proven mitigating circumstances. We have further considered whether Wade Wilson should be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole or death. We, the jury, find by a vote of 10-2 that Wade Wilson should be sentenced to death.
Now it'll be up to the judge to consider the juror's recommendation, as he'll be the ultimate decider on Wilson's penalty. The sentencing hearing for Wilson is slated for July 23rd. At the hearing, arguments and witness statements will be heard before the judge makes the final decision on whether or not Wilson will get life in prison with no parole or be sentenced to death. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.